Welcome. Thank you for clicking on today's video. I normally post videos about having bipolar disorder and an unspecified anxiety disorder. I also have the world's rarest personality type, which is an INFJ. Yes, I'm very intuitive. So if you're coming over from one of those three, I want to say welcome and thank you for clicking on today's video. I am here today with a licensed professional, and her name is Angie.
Hello.
I figured that we are going to do this open collaboration because I think that you would enjoy that kind of content. Basically, we're going to be doing open therapy sessions with me, and you can see what stuff I deal with, my pros, my cons, and this is going to help me, and y'all, I think you will enjoy it. But with that being said, I'm going to let Angie introduce herself, and we'll get going.
Hello, I'm Angie Andrews, and I am a pastoral counselor. I was licensed with an autistic therapy degree, and I've studied human and family behavioral therapy and dance therapies. Basically, I approach everything from somebody equating their existence and identity from a spiritual perspective. And I'm applauding Terry for taking such pro-action in his recovery and in his healing, because this journey is a process, and it's very possible to come out on the other side almost 100% acclimated to fully functioning as an adult without these problems manifesting as your identity.
Well, thank you, Angie. I think that's about wrapping it up.
Okay, so I thank you very much for being able to share your life, and in this safe environment, we want to make sure that you are comfortable. So I will be asking you questions like pretty much when we go to a doctor. They want to know everything backdated. So we have to get an understanding of your genealogy and your history kind of in your family circle. And can you state for me your date of birth?
Sure. So my date of birth is 11/14/93.
Happy birthday, right? So you just had a birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And 25.
Yep.
Nice age. And how would you describe yourself currently as a full functioning 25-year-old adult? How do you feel with your life at this time in starting this endeavor and sharing with others your walk after a diagnosis of, what was it, from Highland Rivers Health?
So at Highland Rivers, they diagnosed me with an unspecified anxiety disorder and bipolar type 2. For people that are out there that are listening that don't know, there's two types. I have the less hypomanic episodes versus type 1, but neither are less severe than either.
Mm-hmm. And just to fully describe that, may I ask, if you have a manic episode, are you looking to describe it as a light switch going on and off, or are yours for days on end? So you could have experiences of highs and then you go into lows for a day or for more?
So what I experience is like a light switch flip. Now that I have been diagnosed, I'm trying to, I guess, take in the information that I'm giving out, and I'll have a demeanor that's more or less very mean, but then I'll apologize later once I kind of rationalize, like, crap, I really was mean. I need to say I'm sorry. So I would say my moods are kind of like that as well. When I wake up in the morning, I typically will be depressed. It's not like I control it. And after I wake up, my mood comes back and I'm happy. But normally in the mornings is when I experience the most anxiety and depression and sadness. It's of yesterday's guilt, I want to say.
Mm-hmm. That's very well said. I have heard many times it described as like an impending doom cloud. Sometimes just opening the eyes, it's laying there, and maybe getting yourself revved up to get out of bed and start the day? Are those first moments of thought challenging for you?
Yeah. So I call this the awkward stage. Now, I did make a video on it, but I didn't touch on it too much in depth, so I figured we'd do it in this. I call it the awkward stage because my mind, it's depressed, it's sad, I have a lot of anxiety, and I've realized my stage will begin to dissipate around 10:30 in the morning after, I start to function, and I completely forget all about the sadness and the depression.
Wow, so I would say that's actually pretty profound, and that tells me that you are well along in your ability to kind of conquer some of those negative emotions, because depression, by definition, is looking back over the past, kind of dwelling on mistakes of the past, where anxiety is that fear of the future. And so trying to find a present state in which we can keep our brain active and grounded, it sounds like you're actually able to take strides to do that as you get your morning started. Would you say to me, if you could describe your family picture and in its current state, are you close with your family members, and do you feel that they understand your diagnosis?
Yes. So, my family. What were the questions real quick?
Okay, so are you close with your family, and are they supportive of your diagnosis?
Alright. Yes, so my family. After I was diagnosed, it was kind of like a deer in the headlights. They saw me coming, and they realized that I was going through this treatment. I told them that I was going to be getting a diagnosis. For them, it was a shock, and I wouldn't say that they're in denial, because after I was diagnosed, they saw the picture and they realized I need help. What I'm going through isn't something to joke about. Even though when I was diagnosed, my dad, he was like, this girl at my work, she has bipolar disorder, and he is so old-fashioned. I don't want to stereotype anything, but if you look at nature versus nurture, for instance, he is work, work, work. They don't complain about your job. And when I told him I was diagnosed with a mental illness, himself, he didn't really understand it. He's like, you weren't born with this. He thought, like, you'd have to be born with, like, autism, per se, or, So mental illness for him is a stigma that's kind of not real, or so to say. And for me, my mom, she really took to it. Because, I guess we'll get to that in a little bit, but there was an incident in my life where it was a opening awakenings of something is definitely wrong.
Okay, so that's good, solid information, because we're dealing with different generations. We're dealing with you being the offspring of a family who maybe doesn't understand to the capacity, and we're dealing with a lot more diagnosis of mental illness in this day and age, because people are becoming more aware of what they don't have. So in actuality, we can form these disorders or these disabilities, and in this case, when there's not a specific definition, so NOS is what we would describe that from the DSM-V. It's basically allowing the patient, the client, to have leeway and pick up on patterns and lower reaction levels, instead of dumbing yourself down or making yourself acceptable to family members. Because in reality, your mental health and your self-care and being your own best advocate is far more essential to your recovery and process than the acceptance of your family. So I do want to make that clear in stating that our family most often is that nurture piece, or the lack thereof, which creates overfiring of norepinephrine and serotonin, or the depletion of those, and therefore we get chemical inadequacies and deficiencies. From that, pharmaceuticals and psychiatrists and the whole medical arena, they try to medicate, when my belief and my practice approach is, I firmly believe that you can come off of medicine and that we can equalize the brain passageways and the chemicals in your brain as you start filling your spirit with truth, and we eradicate some of those lies that have been told over and over to us again as children. And that is baseline wholeness and restoration that I would want to encourage you. You're already well on your way to doing that. Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother, and he is 28.
Okay.
But that's it.
Okay. Are you guys close?
Yeah, we're fairly close.
Okay, very nice. And what is his name?
My brother's name is Robert, or Lee.
Okay. Okay. And when you came to the Highlands place, you made the choice that you wanted to figure out what was wrong with you, because what were you experiencing? What were your symptoms at that time where you're like, something's wrong?
Okay, so I think this is a good time to kind of explain my story, or what truly happened.
Okay.
The funny thing is, you and I, we used to previously work together, and she was at work at the time and place when this actually happened. There was a week that... Alright, so let's start this off this way. One day, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, completely normal, and I felt something in my brain pop. It felt like, I don't know how to describe it, like a little balloon popped inside my brain. And all of a sudden, I felt this wave of adrenaline come over me. And I think that's when I started hearing voices. I've listened to a couple other people explain their situations, and mine seems very similar. I felt like there was a friend, like a bad person, that was coaxing me to do something that I didn't want to do. Now, right here, I want to put a trigger warning. So if you're worried about sensitive information, please skip through until the mark that I have on the screen. But what I skipped about, what overcame me was a suicidal thought. It was like a friend telling me to go do something. Like, hey, come on, let's go. Let's do this. And it was a very scary feeling because it wasn't me saying it. And I had this back and forth kind of conversation saying, no, like, what is wrong with you? So I instantly got up and I went to bed. Now, after I went to bed the next morning, I started detaching from myself. I felt this so-called kind of like derealization of the world, like I wasn't in my body anymore. And I could look in the mirror, and it wasn't me. Like, I looked at myself, but mirrors started to confuse me. Like, I didn't recognize myself inside, and it was a very scary feeling. But throughout a week, this feeling kind of lasted, and like I said, I had a job that I had to consistently go to, and the first day I called out, I didn't know how I was going to go into work, where I didn't know who I was, and I was having like an identity crisis of, well, I don't know, people can say identity crisis of they don't know where they belong. For me, I had an identity crisis as in I didn't know who I was anymore. But that entire week lasted longer than it felt. Very unsettling because I couldn't even ground myself. It was like I was high for an entire week, and that's when I realized it was somewhat of an anxiety. But after being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, what I come to conclude is that wasn't anxiety. I was hallucinating for a week straight, and that is when I experienced my first manic episode. I want to say it was a good 5-6 months ago from now. I haven't had another week like that, but ever since that day, things were different.
Very well described. My question is, when you say the detachment, because that is an actual term, are you kind of saying like, was there any part of you that saw yourself maybe from a distance? You were maybe up on the ceiling and you were looking down on the scenario of yourself?
Yeah, it was very unsettling. Like I said, I wasn't in my physical body, so when I was looking at my mirror, looking in the mirror, that's why I didn't recognize myself. And I went out in public like this because I guess, so to say, what I was afraid of in this situation is I'd never be normal again. So that was a fear. Like, it's been going on for a consistent amount of time. I didn't know if I was coming back to myself or if I was stuck like this forever, because it was the first time I'd ever experienced it. So I think my anxiety was insanely high because of that, and it did not let my levels drop. And at the time, what it felt like it wasn't me. Me and my mother and my father, we went out to dinner, and I didn't eat. I didn't have any appetite. My mind was racing like crazy. I was basically viewing the world from like this foggy glass, like image kind of thing. Like I was just observant, and like I said, referring to as I was high. I just was like just looking around, and things were very unsettling.
I just want to ask a simple question here. How did that make you feel about yourself? Did you have any further thoughts that sounded like a friend speaking them to you? Or did you go into any kind of self-deprecating evaluation? Or what did you say to yourself?
So this is the thing that I didn't want to talk about, but I think it's good to talk about it. I was ashamed of myself. The reason why I was ashamed, I didn't have... Alright, so we talked about, like, suicidal thoughts. I didn't feel any need to end my life. I am completely open. I was a hippie. I was super happy. I loved everything. But I felt ashamed of myself because I took a substance, and I probably shouldn't have. I took a very heavy dose of mushrooms, and it's not like I am a stoner. I don't do drugs every day. I don't even really do them very often. It was a very experimental phase of my life, as in, hey, we should do this. And for me, I don't smoke weed every day, and I'm not stereotyping anyone, so please do not hold me to that. I'm just saying, I was very experimental, and I felt like I shouldn't have done it because when that trauma hit, I felt like I messed up my life. Like, I'm going to be forever stuck this way. And I was so blaming myself, like, you shouldn't have done that, like, you're so stupid. Like, why did you do that? And now, look at yourself now. So I felt the PTSD as in, I wish I could go back and change it, like, tell myself, don't do that. And that's kind of where I was at, and all this self-guilt. I guess a better term would be like self-hatred. I know that's used a lot. Because I couldn't change anything. So time became very relevant, and knowing that I couldn't go back in time and change something so traumatic in my life, of something that I regret, basically, I guess where I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly, self-hatred is the #1 epidemic in America. So that makes perfect sense to me. The thing that you're describing actually is a loop. So it's a loop of thought that becomes kind of like our false identity. So ego is represented, like when we do personality profiling and whatnot, the ego comes in as this protective measure, and we learn how to operate from ego before the age of 7. And I really wanted to address this part of shame, because shame can be a blanket. It can be a heavy weight that is put on us through role models, parents, people in authority generally, because when we're so small, our little minds are egocentric, and we really just think about our basic needs being met. So if we discern in our little brains that mom or dad or brother or teacher is upset with us, it comes into something must be wrong with me. Trauma victims that have actual assaults against their bodies, boundaries being crossed, incest, things of that nature, that carries with them a much greater degree, which actually gives an anchor to suicidal thoughts and whatnot. So all of these things are basically built upon each other. They're kind of layers of evil that really were meant to come against you so that you would self-destruct by the time you reach the age of 25 that you are today. It's just wanting to annihilate you so that you don't have the fruitfulness of adulthood that God basically has ordained for you. So I'm going to bring that back to spiritual, just because we're spiritual beings. But that shaming loop, that self-hatred loop, is something that comes in as soon as we realize we made a mistake.
Thank you. I think I want to jump in right here. It's funny that you mentioned that, because even though I don't have the best relationship with my parents, what really started all of this is exactly kind of what you're saying. When I did the heavy dose of mushrooms, I was at home, and my parents came home. They know that I was a hippie, but they didn't know I experiment with this substance. Now, when you're on a high dose of a psychedelic substance, you feel energies very, very differently than you would on a normal day. And he came home from work. I was on the back porch, and I was so far gone that I couldn't hold a conversation. I was stuck in thought loop after thought loop, detachment, derealization. Like, I was tripping so hard. Now, I'm not saying this for a laugh. I was in a panic. When I took these, I was so scared. All of this fear came over me after I took them, and I was stuck in this horrible state of mind. And then, on top of everything, my father came home and he started to mess with me. My friends were on the porch. We were all on a substance, and he just knew we were on something. He didn't say anything, but he just started getting in everyone's faces and like messing with us. And he never once looked at me because he knew I was on him. And I could feel his guilt. Like, he didn't even want to look at me. Like, he was completely ashamed of what I was doing. And no words were spoken, but I could feel what he was thinking inside on these drugs that I had taken. And I haven't told him until the complete outbreak of the week, and he knew exactly what I was talking about, because I had this horrible pit in my stomach of my dad's guilt, or he was disappointed in me more so than less. And I never had the best relationship with my father, but feeling that guilt, it hurt really bad. And growing up as my childhood, I never once got many hugs, and for him kind of to just like disown me, I wish it was kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling right now here.
I understand, because you've made a lot of key points. The first two basic needs that all of us have as spiritual beings is love and acceptance. And there's many scientific studies that have been done on the lack of touch, and or being told and affirmed that you're loved and accepted. And so when you were experiencing, the use of shrooms and that had that psychedelic effect, that is a very real entry point, because we're spiritual beings. We exist in the spirit realm. And so that would be the inception of a stronghold. And what that plays out in is it fuels the ultimate fear. I did this, it's my fault, and that fault finding is shame and guilt. So that accentuates the loop of self-hatred, because it's spiraling, and it's like a figure 8. And it's always going to be this shame, I shouldn't have done that, and then the irreversible thing. So that makes complete sense in all of our psyches. We are all eventually going to be like the place of inception. What did we do wrong? Because it's so easy to blame. If you hear of stories of camping trips, someone takes the canoe out and they're like, if only I didn't take the canoe out. Okay, it's just a normal response. You're going about the daily routine of an excursion, and our brain always takes it back to, where did we go wrong? Because we want to turn back time. And it's that shame guilt loop that creates self-hatred. And that becomes something that our brain focuses on until it actually sears new thought onto our passageways. And those things can actually be smoothed over, but it takes practice to cast those negative things aside and exchange it. So there's something that actually can be fundamentally introduced at this time, which is called flip it and flip it for good. So you're very intuitive. You already know that when you walk into a room, you can sense, feel, or know what other people are thinking, if they're judging, if it's joyful, if it's sorrowful. We have those top 4 indicators of sadness, joy, fear, and there's one more I'm forgetting.
Skip it.
Okay,
we'll move on.
Yeah, but it's that all of us are able to tally that quickly within seconds when we walk into a new atmosphere. And if you flip it, you can actually take everybody else's jargon, all of what they're bringing, and you can say, this is not mine to carry. What is it showing me about myself? Because your nature is not as reactive as a manic episode would make you respond. Your INFJ personality is very much able to contain information, discern it, and not give people what they want. It's highly effective, almost on a genius level. So because of all that, you can flip any of these scenarios for good. And even dream world, it's if you have a nightmare. If it's a nightmare, what are the positive aspects? Or plain and simple, what is the opposite of what you just experienced? And pursue that, because that practice of, I don't want to be depressed, I don't want to be shaming myself, I don't want to be guilt-ridden. You can take that thought captive, and then you can say the opposite is, I'm forgiving myself, I'm okay in this moment, I feel my feet on the floor, I can take a deep breath, and I can talk to myself as if I'm talking to a friend. And how would I tell myself or my friend, it's okay in this moment, you're not back where you were, where that first moment of thought or that spiral downward began, and you can then become your own best advocate. And these are baby steps that will grow into leaps and bounds. But you are most definitely a person that's able to acclimate quickly to this, and that's because God formed you this way. I'm not going to jam Jesus down anybody's throat, and I will keep it God, because people can see God as they need to in their recovery process. It's okay for me if it's going to be a doorknob. I'm just saying that God still fashioned you with this intricacy and intimacy, because He does want you to be loved and accepted. With that, how do you want to see us moving forward in your care? What is something that you're looking for? Are you looking for an accelerated way to work through bipolar disorder? Do you want to see it gone within a year? What are some of your goals?
I guess real quick, I want to jump back. you talked about touch and feeling. I've always wanted, I don't know, it's love and affection from my family. I never got that much as a child, and I always wanted it. And there was another thing I wanted to mention. After my week episode, in the mix of all of it, I told my parents what was going on, and I told them, and I felt this pressure, this wave lift off of my shoulders, as in, they now know there's nothing to be ashamed of. And it was one of the best feelings in the world, because it's like, imagine if you lied to someone your entire life and then you told them the truth, like, I'm sorry, like, you're asking for forgiveness. And I kind of got my forgiveness, but now I had to move forward. And that's when things started to turn better. Now, you mentioned, where do I want to see myself, maybe next week, or where are we going with this? I want simply just to be happy. There was a point in time in my life where I loved everybody, everything, and after my manic episode, I became very selfish, very narcissistic, and I wouldn't say sociopath, that's just completely different, but very narcissistic. I only cared about myself, my mental health, and I just wanted to be grounded back in my own body again. So this is probably about 7 months later to get to where I am, where I can openly talk about this, and I want to bring whoever listens to this some grounding, knowing, if this is when you're at your most troubled days, I want you to know that it will get better, because as you see, I have gone through something very traumatic. So I don't want you to feel like you are alone out there, and, realize there is a plus side. You can look up even though if it is something very traumatic, because I didn't know the unknown and the uncertainty of if I would come back to myself was terrifying. As in, I made a mistake, the unforgettable, that you're saying, that you can't go back and change it. So, knowing that I moved where I am and I've gotten to where I am, I think it's very good. Where I want to see myself in the late future, I actually do not know. I think it would be good to, a stepping stone of if I've made it to the next block, so to say, but I really don't know, to be honest.
That's a very honest answer, and I think the sky's the limit. There's so many opportunities as we grow and change, and everybody is capable of change. So you will at times take 1 step forward, 2 step backwards, 5 step forward, 10 step backwards, and all of that is still the process of inner healing work. Also, I strongly suggest to all of my clients, I say, you are never defined by a prognosis or diagnosis. And it, in fact, is not who you really are. And in our work, I would hope it would reveal the fact that there's so many layers to our personalities that we are not fully defined just by what a doctor says. Most doctors also, they have to come clinically and they have to put stuff in your chart. There's insurance involved. They have to make sure that they're basically getting all the red tape accounted for. And sometimes that can make a sterile diagnosis. And I would go as far as to say word curse some people, because some people walk out completely overwhelmed and discouraged after they get their diagnosis. And in my opinion, for you, it was almost something eye-opening, something that I think you grabbed onto to alleviate, to kind of work through. And personality types have a great deal to do with your reaction, your decision as to how you're going to move forward. Kind of like when someone gets diagnosed with cancer, you have those that believe they're going to die and they actually do, those that believe they're going to recover and they actually do.
Right.
And I think that your personality, thankfully, is one that's so open to the possibilities of healing that you're inevitably going to find it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I definitely would agree with that. And I guess, on a smaller note, the reason I want to do this like podcast kind of thing is I notice my memory retention has significantly decreased. So even now, listening to her answers, my mind, it tries to fill in blanks of the questions she's just brought to attention or mentioned, and I'll start to daze off on what she just said and forget what she's currently talking about. So it's like what you normally do when you're watching a movie. You try to anticipate what's next, or you'll wander off. Like when you're reading a book, your mind wanders off and paints pictures, and you lose some of the information. So I'll be able to take this podcast and go back and listen to the information that she was given to me, as you are, as well listening. So I think we all can kind of relate. Our mind drifts, so that's why I wanted to kind of come about this. But yes, I definitely would agree.
Yeah, that's great. And all of these things are normal. The brain is so powerful, and God created it for the fact that it would protect us, that there's places that actually hold memory, and in one memory alone, you can have up to 1,000 different facets of emotion and how it triggers you. And there's never a blanket statement of, have you forgiven this person who did this to you? Because you may need to actually forgive that person 1,000 times in one memory. So our brains are so complex for our mental health, for the ability to be able to bounce back from trauma or from perceived threat. The whole flight and fight response with our sympathetic nervous system was all meant to protect all the different areas in our brain, so that we can grow and our character can build. And where you're weak in one area, the strength overrides that and you're able to move forward. That's the reason why repressed memories sometimes come up for adults, and they've basically gone on autopilot through their childhood, adolescence, until they suddenly can't shove something that had pained them anymore. And that's a little bit of what you're experiencing with bipolar episodes, because there's parts of you that don't really know, am I present? Because my mind is over here. Or it's like when you're driving down the road and before you know it, you're at your destination, but you don't remember driving there.
Right.
And all of that, I just want to encourage you, is actually normal. It's all part of our process. It's also the keen, it's the most important point to make, that we're also individual, that we all have our own fingerprints. And some of us may look alike, or, I always relate it to faces, this facial recognition, but, the feet may be the determining factor that says, oh yeah, they're definitely different. We are so intricately different and unique that in your process, as I walk alongside you to get deeper and deeper into those places that you need to heal, you're going to be on a journey with yourself. And it is my job to make sure that we bring out all of your parts that you don't even like. Because if you learn to like that, you become a full person that levels out all of your emotions. And you love yourself, and you give yourself the love and affection that you never received, or you wanted more when you were a child.
It's so funny that you mentioned the driving thing. And that was, for me, was very unsettling. It was scary. There'd be times where I was driving and I'd instantly reground, and it's like, what am I doing right here? I noticed it when I was driving on the freeway, and that's why I initially wanted to go or file for Social Security. Is I didn't know when I would be grounded and when I wasn't, and I kind of chalked them as like mood swings, or not mood swings, thought loops. I would randomly be in places, and then my anxiety would come out when I would reground, because it's like, what am I doing here? Like, I'd kind of panic. But yes, it was a freaky thing.
Well, all those things are they're really just signals that are telling us, pay attention, and going as slow as you can go sometimes is the best thing you can do. Because in any of our fight or flight reactions or a manic episode, we're really having surges of anxiety pulsate, and they're making us make rash decisions or quick responses that are just extremely fueled by an emotion that needs to simmer down. But that's for any of us. So you're well on your way to definitely understanding yourself, and that's the best part of therapy, any kind of therapy that we do. And so I'm proud of you, and I look forward to our next session together.
Well, thank you. And I think where we're going to leave this today is very valuable information. I don't think there was anything that was unsaid for one of our first, sessions together, as this podcast is going to continue. You over time will hear more things about me that go deep in depth. No stone is going to be left unturned. And if you enjoy this podcast, please go over and check out Angie's channel. She definitely has many amazing videos that I think would value, over some of mine. But nonetheless, my videos are pretty good too. If you would, go ahead and leave those comments down below. Like this video if you found it useful. And if you're new, go give us a subscribe button. Hit it for us. Alright. Well, I think that's about it. Do you want to add any last words, Angie?
Nope, you can check me out on Angie Andrews Eyesight, and have a blessed day.